So when our oldest son was a teenager, he was having a lot of problems with congestion and things like that. So our family doctor recommended that he go see an allergist. So I took him to an allergist and sat down, and the allergist began to go through a series of questions with him about what are your symptoms. And she would list the symptoms to see if he had those. And as she went down the list, I said, I have those. And she said, well, you need to make an appointment and come and see me. And so it turned out our son had allergy testing and a lot of allergies, and he started on allergy shots. And it turned out that I started on allergy shots, because as the allergist said, he got his allergies from somewhere. And I was amazed at the difference when I started the allergy shots, how different, the difference that I felt. Because before I didn't feel bad. Because I guess I had felt that way for so long that I had gotten used to it and it had become normal. And I didn't realize the health I didn't have until I went on the allergy shots. It is easy for us to normalize what is abnormal. It is easy for us to settle for things the way they are instead of striving for the way things should be. And that was the situation of the people of Israel here in this story today. Now, I doubt that you've read the book of Haggai lately. Probably not. It's the second shortest book in the Old Testament after Obadiah. The prophet Haggai prophesied in what we call the post-exilic time. That is, that after the people of Israel were conquered by the Babylonians and many were taken to Babylon to be held captive here now, King Cyrus of Persia had conquered the Babylonian Empire and had issued an edict that the people of Israel could return to their land. That was the policy of Cyrus. While other nations, when they conquered lands, were pretty brutal towards the people that they conquered, King Cyrus had a more enlightened approach, and he believed to allow cultures to continue to exist, that would be what would be best for his overall kingdom. And so he gave word to the Jews that they could return, and about 50,000 returned back to Israel. And what they came back to was a nation that they had to rebuild, both physically and spiritually. They returned to a Jerusalem where the walls had all been torn down from the city, where the temple had been set afire and burned to the ground. A place where they had to almost completely start over again. And even the Jews that remained in the land after the captivity, that were able to remain there, many of them had intermarried with the pagan cultures that were around them. And so the land needed a lot of rebuilding. And one of the tasks of the people who returned was to rebuild the temple. But after 18 years, they only had gotten as far as laying the foundation. They were focused more on trying to survive, more on their own economic needs, more on just survival, trying to figure out a way to make it as they really were coming back to nothing, to start over again. They didn't have a Home Depot to go into, right, and get building materials and grocery stores just to go in and shop. And so it was a struggle many times just to survive. And they began to convince themselves, well, we'll set aside the rebuilding of the temple for now. We'll get to it when things settle down more, when we get a little more established, when things get better. And so this is when God speaks through the prophet Haggai to the people. And he asks them the question, why are you living in your paneled houses while my house lies in ruins? Why are you going back to your house when I don't have a house? And he challenges the people to get back to the rebuilding, to focus on what was important, because they were never going to move forward again as a nation until they had the temple rebuilt, a central focus for them on the worship of God. A people that had been scattered, now needing to come back together again and unify. And the temple, more than anything else, was going to be a symbol of that unification. So he challenges the people to look at their lives and to look how things have been going for them. And he basically says to them, you haven't been getting anywhere, have you? You're kind of spinning your wheels here. You're planting crops, but you're not really reaping from them. You have jobs, but you're putting your money into purses that have holes in them. We know what that feels like, don't we? When the money goes out as fast as it comes in, right? Yeah. He says you're not gaining anything. You're not moving forward. He says, why is this? It's because my house hasn't been built yet. He says, the things that you have that you brought in with you, I've blown them away. I've withheld the rain. I've withheld the crops. Because I want you to understand that you need to rebuild my temple. Back in the 2-year period between 2011 and 2013, our family was going through some economic struggles. We had kind of hit that stage where we had 2 teenage drivers in the house, and we had a couple accidents, and so you can imagine what our car insurance was at that time. We had to replace a couple cars, one because one was totaled, the other because it just conked out. And there was a lot of pressure on our budget. And I was just going over the numbers in the budget, and they just didn't add up. And trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And so I decided, well, we'll cut back on our tithe to the church. Beth and I, we try to tithe our best. We're not always perfect with it, but we try to tithe and we try to stay on a tithe. And I had decided, and the key with that, I had decided, my mistake was I didn't talk to Beth about it. I just decided we needed to cut back on our giving to the church. And for that 2 years, we were just spinning our wheels economically. We weren't getting anywhere. Mounting credit card debt and all those kind of things. We just weren't making any headway. Until finally, I sat down and I said to myself, the only thing that's keeping me from tithing is a lack of faith. I just have to believe in God's word. Again, believe in that tithe. And we started tithing again, and it was amazing to see what had happened. No, we didn't get rich. We weren't on Easy Street. But it was just amazing the things that happened. We received a rebate check in the mail that we had no idea that was coming, and I don't even remember what it was a rebate from now. But it wasn't a huge amount, but it represented a need that we had. It filled a need that we had at the time. We were wondering, how to fulfill this need we had, and here this rebate check showed up out of the blue, and we had that need filled. The bank called and just said, hey, we want to review your accounts. And so I went down, and they went over our accounts, and they, we got a consolidation loan that made better payments for us. And she asked about our car loan, and so I told her. She said, "Oh, we can give you a better rate than that." And so we refinanced the car loans, and it was just amazing how things happened, got us back on track. That's what God was telling the people of Israel. If you don't take care of my house first, you're not going to get anywhere. And so God's command to them also came with a promise. And it's amazing when God gave the command, when he tells them what's happening, he gives them the simple solution. Right? Sometimes the simple solutions are the best. Sometimes the simple solutions are the ones that we don't think about. But he simply tells them, go up to the hills, get wood, and build my house. Right? It's as simple as that. All the things that you think are obstacles, all the things that you think are blocking your way, all the things that you think are impossible, you're looking, you're saying, oh, we don't have a ton of resources, we don't have a ton of people here. All these things that are working against us, God simply tells them, go to the hills, get the wood, build the house. The bottom line is it's a matter of will. It's a matter of will. What time is it? It's time to prioritize God in your lives. But God doesn't just give commands. God gives promises to go with those commands. And so the promise that he gave them was when they rebuilt his house, when they rebuilt the temple, his glory would fill the temple, and the glory of this temple would be greater than the glory of the first temple. And that he was going to shake the heavens and the earth, and his glory would reign. And so the people rallied, and they were able to rebuild the temple in 4 years. When previously it took them 18 years just to get the foundation laid, they completed the temple in 4 years. And one might think, well, where was the fulfillment of God's promise? Because the temple they built wasn't as big as Solomon's temple. The nation of Israel didn't conquer other nations around them. The other nations weren't streaming like God had prophesied. Where was the answer to God's prayer as they faithfully built God's house? Well, that's where we have to understand that the prophecy that God was giving them, the promise that God was giving them, wasn't about the literal physical temple that they were building, but it was about the spiritual temple that was coming into the world in the name of Jesus Christ. That he was sending his Son into the world, and that was the temple through which God's glory was going to shine. Jesus himself referred to himself as the temple, announcing to his disciples when they were looking at the grandeur of Herod's temple that was there, which was bigger, I think, than Solomon's temple. When that had gotten built, he said, "You think this is so great?" He said, "Tear down this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days." And he wasn't talking about the physical temple, Herod's temple. He was talking about his body. He was talking about himself as the temple. That was the promise that God was making, that Messiah would come. You rebuild the temple, and Messiah is going to come. And my glory is going to fill the earth, and I am going to reign. And that promise was fulfilled and is fulfilled. And Jesus does sit at the right hand of the Father, and Jesus reigns, and God's glory does fill the earth through his forgiveness and his mercy and his power and his love and his justice. This passage challenges us to look at our own spiritual journeys, to ask ourselves, what do we need to do in order to move forward in our faith? What have we been accepting as normal in our lives that God has told us doesn't need to be normal or shouldn't be normal? Have we just accepted things the way they are, or are we moving forward to be better in our own faith, better in our own walk, better as a community of faith? What is holding us back from challenging ourselves to walk in that way? One of Dr. Martin Luther King's writings talked about the need for America to become maladjusted. He was using a popular psychological word of the 60s, being maladjusted. And what he was talking about was how the country had become amazingly adjusted to slavery, and then amazingly adjusted to segregation. And it was a call in this writing to become maladjusted, to say, hey, don't accept the norm for the way the things should be, but God is calling us to do something better. God is calling us in our lives to constantly be moving forward, to constantly becoming more like him each and every day. That was the ministry of John Wesley, who founded Methodism. That was his call in his day that brought revival to England, telling people that your faith isn't about a piece of paper that says that you've been baptized. Your faith isn't about the fact that you might sit in a pew every Sunday morning. Your Christian faith is something that walks with you every single day of your life, where God's love needs to flow from you. And I believe that our church is in the beginning of this kind of awakening. I believe that we are in the beginning processes now of being able to see the possibilities that exist beyond doing things just the way we've always done them. believe we are in the beginning processes of seeing God move through us and in us in some new and exciting ways. It's time to stop waiting in our lives. It's time to stop conning ourselves into thinking, well, I can't take care of my spiritual life until some other things settle down. I had a woman one time in one of the churches that I served came to me and said, I'll come back to church when I get some things squared away in my life first. It's like, no! You got it backwards. Right? The things that we want to do in our faith, more prayer, more Bible readings, whatever it might be, tithing, right, of our income, those things that we just put off, say, well, when things get a little less crazy in my life, right, when things get a little less stressful, then I'll do those things. What we don't realize is that time never comes. There's always going to be something happening in our lives. I remember when I started seminary, my first year in seminary, and they sat down with all of us that were first-year students. One of the things they stressed to us was the principle that you'll never be more in ministry than you are right now. They cautioned us not to view seminary as some sort of 3-year spiritual retreat that we were going in. Well, most of us 4 years, but But rather, they wanted us then, while we were students there, they wanted us to to connect with a local church somewhere in the area and be active in that church. Because the lie is, I can't get involved in that stuff right now. I got all the studying to do. We had to read 1,000 pages for every class we had. Typically, you took 4 classes in a semester, sometimes 5. You had to read 1,000 pages in each of those classes a semester. Right? So I got to do all this reading. I had to do all these papers. We got to do all these things. And we could con ourselves into thinking, I just don't have time to serve God right now. And so they were reminding us, they say, hey, you'll never be more in ministry than you are right now. In other words, there's always going to be pressures in your life. There's always going to be a time crunch in your life. There's always going to be things going on. You have to make up your mind to understand what time it is. It's time to put God first and make sure you're always putting God first. To serve God no matter what our circumstances are, no matter where we are in life, to understand that that's the top priority in our life. And when we get that straight, then other things begin to happen in our lives. And these other things that we are struggling to keep together or we're struggling to move forward in, then all of a sudden they start to be set in place. We can't allow ourselves, either as individually in our faith or as a community of faith, to accept things the way they are. And to just say, that's the way they are and that's the way they're going to be. We need to constantly be allowing God to lead us to what is better. To build God's house so that our spiritual houses in our hearts are able to be finished. Let's pray.